Dear Biker, this is a story that my mother and aunts told me when I was in high school. I'm 21 now, and it's never left me. I think about it almost constantly and still ponder over what happened. My grandfather passed away in June of 2020. He was 96 when he died, and it caused some issues in my family. Now, it doesn't really pertain to the story, but there are some things about him that I have to share to explain the story in the best way possible. Now, my grandfather John was a man who was extremely calloused and old-fashioned. He was bitter, abusive, and a complete macho man. My mom was raised to never show emotion or pain due to his abuse and lack of compassion for others. He was also pretty racist. He had many secrets in my family that are just now coming to light after his death. Everything that happened around him was brushed off and forgotten because, well, he had more important things to do, like drinking and having multiple affairs. Just an overall intense and no-nonsense type of man. He also wasn't religious at all and found things like faith and hope to be stupid. Now, the story takes place sometime in the 70s, most likely early to mid-70s, because my mom was born in 1965 and still remembers the story clearly. My aunts as well remember this happening, but to this day no one remembers exactly what year. It all happened one summer day when John decided to take his family on a small outing with the intent to have a picnic in the woods. My mother, her three sisters, and her mother and grandmother were all there and very excited about this. Where we're from, my family is more than accustomed to the woods and have lived in this area for generations. Going into the woods for a fun family activity was nothing out of the ordinary and seemed to be just another normal day. Well, they made their way down a dirt backwoods road and stopped once they found a clearing large enough to accommodate them. As all the kids started jumping out of the car and messing around like kids do after being stuck together, my grandmother began unloading their food and picnic supplies. John started surveying the area, deciding where to set up. As he was doing that, something in the woods past the clearing caught his eye. Before going to see what was out there, he yelled to the family that he'd be right back. The kids and my grandmother thought not much of this since they were all used to the woods, and these woods in particular were very familiar to them. They continued unloading and setting up the stuff they had brought. One of the girls pointed out something in the clearing that caused a sudden shift from a normal day into something far worse. It was a dirt mound that looked like something was buried under it. Now, this mound was about the size of a small person, maybe even child-sized. It was too big to simply be any animal in these woods, and there was nothing but squirrels and raccoons around there. Scattered amongst the mounds were larger river rocks. There was no discernible pattern, but they were definitely placed on the mound intentionally. Also, the dirt seemed to be fresh, as though just buried. It was loose and slightly darker than the area around it. The mood immediately shifted from an average day in the woods to something much darker. My grandmother became concerned and told all the girls to stay away from it. She was clearly upset and worried about it, but she did her best to ignore it. The girls, though, all being children, didn't have the same amount of worry and continued playing while just avoiding the mound. They tried to return to their picnic, and the girls were already chasing each other in circles again. It was supposed to be a joyous, sunny day, and my grandmother wanted to keep it that way. Things started to return to normal for a beat. The trees around them created a wall of dense forest, blocking their view from anything inside the woods. One of the girls again took notice of something strange. It was clear immediately what it was. Along one of the long branches on the tree hung a noose. It was tied with rope and hung high above their heads. A lump of dirt can be explained away by nature, but someone had to have intentionally placed the noose there. My grandmother stopped dead in her tracks when she first saw it. Something was wrong. Very, very wrong. And they couldn't just pack up and leave. John was still somewhere out in those woods. And even the children could recognize a noose as a symbol of death. The children started to become very anxious. Whatever innocence was keeping them from worrying about that mound had completely vanished. My grandmother, the resilient woman she is, soothed her children and told them it was just left there by deer hunters. But she knew in her heart that they really needed to leave. No deer hunter would just hang a deer and then bury it. At least, no sane deer hunter. It wasn't until they started hearing something in the woods that they all began to really panic. My grandmother, as well as the children, began hearing a rhythmic chanting from deep in the woods somewhere. It sounded as though there was a group of people, all singing in really deep voices to the beat of a drum. It went in a quick boom, boom, boom pattern. 3 steady beats, followed by a pause, and then it would repeat. It sounded kind of far away, but immediately, fear began to take hold of each of them, and they all listened and gathered together. As the seconds passed, it began to increase in volume. It was not just getting louder, but it was getting closer. What had started out as a distant echo soon began to engulf the entire clearing. My grandmother was terrified and wanted desperately to leave, but John hadn't returned yet. So they waited, fear-ridden, as the sound began to fill their ears. It almost felt like they were at a concert as the deep bass began to vibrate in their chest. It was everywhere and constant, as though the sound was being made by the very trees themselves, surrounding the family in every direction. Suddenly, the sound of yelling broke through the constant drone of the chanting and drums. John's voice was yelling out to them from the trees. "Go," he yelled. "Get in the car." That's when he came running out of the woods, yelling that they all needed to leave. They had never seen terror on this man as they had at that moment. He was a man who was afraid of nothing, completely unbothered by the world around him. This was the most emotion that any of them had ever seen from him. He had seen something in those woods, something that shook his very being to the core. My grandmother began throwing everything in the back of the car as the kids got in as well. John and my grandmother picked up their things and, as quickly as possible, threw it all into the vehicle. They had no care for the things they were packing up due to their fear. Food was scattered all over the trunk and items were broken. After everything was tossed in, they both hopped in and drove away quickly. Now this is where the main grunt of the story ends, but one fact from the story is what really caused me to wonder all these years. My grandfather has refused to ever speak about what he saw. He never told any of the children or my grandmother. Every time this was brought up, he quickly rebuffed it and angrily just told them to never ask again. He never went to the police or told anyone outside the family. My grandfather is the only person who knows what really happened that day. When I first heard this story, I swore to myself that I would ask him when I could. Now I can't, and I deeply regret it. By the time I was in high school, he had moved out of the state with other family members, and I completely lost contact with him outside of the occasional happy birthday calls or letters. This story doesn't really have an answer to go along with it. When he died, the only thing I was sad about was never knowing what really happened that day. We weren't close when I got older, and once I learned of all the abuse that he caused, I had separated myself from him. His death still looms over me, and this story haunts me to this day. My mother and aunts just look back on it as a spooky memory from their childhood. Nothing more than a story, to spook the little ones at Thanksgiving with. I'm one of the only people in the family who's still curious about what really happened. I've always been interested in mysteries, the occult, horror, and conspiracy theories. This story caught my interest more than any others in my family. By the way, this isn't the only strange story from my family history, but it is definitely the strangest. I wish I had answers. I hope you all find this story as fascinating as I do. Signed, Rhonda. Dear Tattooed, about 5 years ago, my older sister and I went to a nature park, a wetland, so to speak, in Gulf Shores, Alabama. Of course, we went at night so we could skateboard around because you aren't allowed to. But a 14-year-old trying to look cool in front of her 24-year-old sister. And we went just around the time the sun was setting. For a little bit, we got lost, since the park was so huge and condensed with thick woods. We were trying to find the bridge, a 20-foot or so bridge so we could just hang out above the rushing river. By the time we got there, the sun was barely visible over the mountains. I looked around after my drinking water, and here's where the creepy stuff happened. As I looked at the other side of the bridge, I saw a tall, skinny, human-like figure. I first just shrugged it off like it was a person, maybe even a ranger at the park. But then suddenly it dropped down on all fours and walked away. I didn't say anything at first, mainly because I thought maybe it was a bear. I looked back at my sister as we chatted about boys and things, and then I looked back at the end of the bridge. My sister did it at the same time, and, we both saw the figure this time. At this point, I was totally freaked out. Mind you, it's still not completely dark. The sky was purple and orange, so it wasn't like we were seeing things, like when your mind pictures figures in the dark. No, this thing was right here, and this time it was getting closer. I told my sister we had to get the hell out of here. Her going off the bridge first and down the hill, and I went second. As I turned to look back again, it was 5 feet in front of me, on all fours once again. It just stood there as me and my sister skated off, and this isn't even the end. I told my sister to head to the main building since there are cameras and lots of light. It seemed like we skateboarded for hours, every minute seeming to last an eternity. As we finally reached the main building, we finally stopped riding our boards. Terrified and out of breath, we both looked around. By this time, it was pitch black outside. We made a mad dash to the car, taking a path we had never seen before. But it was outside the park, which made us feel safer. As we reached my sister's Jeep, we both hopped in, hearts racing and scared out of our minds. When we tried to leave, we found the gate was locked, meaning we couldn't leave, since there was only one way in and out of the park. We got even more scared. We tried everything to get out. We even thought about just leaving the car behind and walking the 2 hours home. But we ended up driving off onto the sidewalk and got out of the park. Now to this day, I won't go back to those wetlands ever again, even in broad daylight. Whatever that thing was, I'm sure I'd never want to see it again. I just can't stop thinking about it, and I'm almost 19 now. You may think this is just a story, but it really did happen. And my sister and I don't talk about it even to this day. Something changed between us then, and I could feel it after that day. Signed, Diane. Hey TB. First, here is some backstory. For the biggest part of my life, I lived in Greece, and I just recently moved to Canada. In Greece, we don't have tales of skinwalkers or other sinister beings, so if I say something incorrect, it's probably because I lack information and knowledge. I started riding my motorcycle to Ontario around 10 p.m., a 7-hour trip from where I lived. Roughly halfway there, I guess around 1 a.m., the fuel tank ran empty. Now I need to note that I was sure that I had a full tank before leaving, so this in itself was very weird. I called 911 since I didn't know who to call at that point, and the dispatcher said that although I shouldn't call for this kind of issue, she'd send someone out to help me. I apologized profusely and thanked her. The place I was stopping was a straight road with trees on each side, a deep forest. I was near French River Provincial Park. When the conversation had ended, I noticed something extremely weird. Silence. Extreme silence, as if everything around me had suddenly died. The crickets that were previously getting on my nerves had somehow disappeared, and the owls were nowhere to be heard. Then I heard a dog crying from somewhere inside the woods. It was extremely distinct since it was the only thing that I could hear. Since I love dogs, I slowly, but hesitantly, started making my way inside the woods to see if a dog was hurt. I was approaching, and I could hear the crying louder with each step. And then I stopped. The crying was now taking place in front of me, but then it stopped, and instead of crying, the sound that I could now hear was an aggressive growl behind me. I turned around, and that's when I saw it. It wasn't a dog, a wolf, or a bear. In fact, it wasn't anything like I'd ever seen. It was a 7-something-foot tall thing with a dog face and extremely sharp teeth. I literally crapped my pants at that moment. My survival instinct kicked in, and I immediately started running back towards my motorcycle, crying as a result of being so terrified. I finally made my way back to the road, and that's where I saw a fire truck with 2 firefighters. They asked me if I was okay, but I was so scared I couldn't say a word. I was literally shivering. When I was finally able to speak, I told them everything. They said that this was a common thing there, and that the Rangers had been looking for that thing for more than a decade. They checked out my bike for me, and when they looked at the tank, they saw claw marks all over it and spilled fuel. They took me with them and helped me with my motorcycle. I'm completely traumatized, and I still can't explain what I saw. That's the real reason that I share this story with you, to see if anyone else out there has had any similar experiences. Signed, Nicholas. Dear Tattooed Biker, now I had never heard of the black-eyed kids until I encountered them. Still not knowing who or what the hell they were, I did what any modern young man would do. I Googled them. I was shocked that I wasn't the only one. Had I not seen them for myself, I would have just thought it to be another modern urban legend gone viral. Besides my girlfriend, I've only ever told my brother, who's into everything paranormal. I personally am an accountant. My girlfriend and I live in a small gated community in southern West Virginia called Glade Springs. The community has about 150 houses, a country club, and a steakhouse called Bunkers. Now anyone can come through the gate during business hours, but after they close, the front security gate stops all traffic and makes sure that you're a resident. If you're a visitor, they call the house that you're going to verify that you're actually expecting them. Sometimes it's a hassle, but hey, you don't have to worry about a robbery. So imagine my surprise when my doorbell chimed at 2:30 a.m. I was jarred awake and wasn't sure if it was just a dream, considering I had just gone to bed shortly before. I rolled over and looked at the clock, noticing the time, and that's when my doorbell chimed again. That's when I felt a sudden, cold chill run through my body. Not reading too much into it, thinking that one of my neighbors might be having an emergency. So I nonchalantly made my way to the door. Looking back now, I see how foolish I really was. Opening it, luckily, The wrought iron storm door was still locked because who or what stood before me was definitely not a resident of the community. There, two young boys stood on my doorstep, one looking to be about 17 and the other about 10, both wearing dark hooded sweatshirts and jeans. The young one had shaggy, dirty blonde hair and would only look down at the stone steps, and the older one had his hood pulled and his head tipped to where I could only see half his nose down. My voice caught in my throat, and before I could even ask what they wanted, the older one speaks. His voice sounded forced and dry, and there was no emotion or sincerity in what he said. He says, "I'm sorry to bother you and your girlfriend, but we need to come in and use your phone. We've been in an accident." I felt that chill again, returning to my whole body. Now, how did he know my girlfriend was even here? I just wrote it off as my Tahoe and her Volkswagen were in the driveway, and I figured they just assumed. I tripped over my words. Something about these kids just wasn't right, wasn't normal, wasn't exactly human. I said, "Can I bring you my cell phone and you can call? I don't get service inside here, so you'll have to stand on the sidewalk to make the call." I finally stammered out. And of course I was lying through my clenched teeth. I definitely did not want these kids in my house. And that's when he says, "Well, my brother really needs to use your bathroom, Chuck. Can we please come in?" And that's when I went into a complete panic. He knew my name. "I'm sorry, are you from here? How did you know my name?" The words practically shook out of my mouth. And that's when he became slightly hostile and demanded to be let inside. I told them I was sorry, but I couldn't help them. And just as I was about to close the main door is when it happened. The both of them snapped their heads upwards and looked me straight in the eyes. Solid black. No iris, no pupil, no retina, just pure, deep black. I was paralyzed with fear. For a second, I thought those kids were just playing a really cruel joke and had snuck into the community somehow, and had brought some of those freaky, supernatural, demon-like contacts. That was until I heard ringing. It was like a ringing sound you hear when you have a hearing test done, and that digital, high-pitched shrill, and that's when the flashback started, and suddenly everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was shaken awake, lying in the mudroom floor. My girlfriend was standing over me with a worried look. "What the hell, Chucky?" she asked me. I had no idea how to answer her. My head shook, had taken a good whack against the slate floor, and a bit of dried blood was stuck in my hair, but other than that, I was fine, physically. I slowly remembered everything that had happened and looked over at the door. It was daylight. I've never been so happy to see morning in my whole life. I told my girlfriend everything and what had happened, and I honestly think that she thought that I had brain damage from hitting the floor, but she insisted that she believed me. But then we Googled it, and that's when I think that she really believed me. I don't know who or what they are or where they come from, but they're definitely not of this world. I know that for a fact. For some reason, I had a lingering thought, and I'm not sure if they put the thought in my head or not, that they wanted me to know that even my memories weren't safe. They are very strong and seem to be growing in numbers. For some reason, they don't seem to be able to hurt you physically unless you invite them in, which I don't know since either one of them has ever been let in, or the ones that have aren't around to tell their story anymore. But they can get into your mind, and since that night I feel as though I'm being watched, like I see them out of the corner of my eye occasionally. Sometimes I'll look at my girlfriend while we're at the movies or dinner, and her eyes will suddenly appear to be solid black for just a split second. And the worst of all, they took one of my most precious and most reminiscent memories and turned it into something sinister. Something that's now a constant reminder of the black-eyed kids. Thanks for reading. Signed, Chuck. And there it is. All the true reports of strange encounters and sightings that I have for you tonight. So what'd you think about these? As always, I'm anxious to read your thoughts and theories down in the comments below, but please, keep it respectful to the witnesses. And if you have an unexplained encounter that you'd like to share, just send it to the email address in the description and, well, your story may just wind up in a future video. Anyways, thanks so much for taking this weird ride with me tonight. I really appreciate you. And until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and well, I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker out.